So this is officially the start of tasting, folks. Ignore everything I've said from before then. So for everyone joining, evening, Martin in the chat there. How are you doing? For those of you who are joining for the first time, my name's Luke. I'm the W Club manager. We want these tastings to be super interactive, so do get your tasting notes and your comments in the chat the whole way through. And at the end, I'll be giving a discount code for 15% off all the tequilas and mezcals we've tasted tonight. So a bit of a digression from the usual whiskey tonight. So thank you for joining us. If you're not normally a tequila mezcal drinker, maybe are looking at getting into it for the first time, let us know in the chat. Or if you're a seasoned tequila mezcal drinking or drinker, then do let us know that as well. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Clooney couldn't be here. We've someone even better looking and more charming. So Cara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. I'm the brand ambassador for tequila for the UK. I work with Diageo, so I predominantly look after Don Julio and Casamigos. Now, been in this industry about 18 years, and I would say tequila's probably been my bloodstream for about 15 of them. So it is a massive pleasure to be able to speak to people and just bring people into the world of agave. Now, despite the Scottish accent, I'm actually based down in London. So we're going to be going through a few of our range today. We won't be doing 2 full ranges because that takes us up to about 15 tequilas, and generally by the end, people won't remember what I said at the beginning. So today we're going to be working through the Casamigos range. So we're going to be going with the Blanco to start with, followed by the Reposado and Añejo. We're then going to do a slight digression to stay on the tequila train. We want to keep our palates nice and fresh. So then we'll actually do a little sidestep over to Don Julio. We'll get some of that incredible Cristalino, getting our juices going, and then we'll come back for the mezcal. Now, we can always kind of flit in between. And of course, if you're at home and you want to add a touch of water or ice, or even create yourselves a little paloma as we go, please feel free. Now, when we start speaking about tequila, and for me, it's always so important when there is a spirit with such origins behind it. In the grand scheme of the years that tequila and agave spirits have been around, tequila is relatively new. We're talking about the 1900s when this started to really get its denomination of origins and understanding of kind of the real Blue Weber agave, why we're using the different species that we are. But agave plants have been around a lot longer than we had wonderful marketing and incredible celebrities drinking our tequilas. That the roots of agaves have been around a lot longer than us. So when we actually go back all the way back to the 1500s is where the first documentation of agave spirits really first started. And this was actually with the Aztecs, because when we are creating any form of alcohol, and I'm sure many of you may have been on some of the whiskey sessions previously, for any alcohol, you need to have, at the very base fundamental level, 3 things. You need to have sugar, you need to have heat, and you need to have yeast. Mexico has all of these things in abundance. There's natural yeast in the air, and there's a very intense heat that comes from that sun. So when we talk about the agave plant and the living being that it is, when it gets to full maturity, it will actually split open. And what that will do, it will expose the sugars that have already started to become, the starches that have already turned into sugars naturally. So when that sunlight, when that very intense heat hits it, it will start to ferment. And this liquid's actually called pulque. So although we are not going to be able to taste some pulque, it's a very low kind of ABV, something like mead, or if you've drank any Sri Lankan spirits, it's like a toddy that you get from a very low fermented coconut. But we are going to pour a little bit of our Blanco tequila so that we can actually sip along whilst we have a little chat about poke. So please feel free to pour a little bit of Blanco. Now, this is a safe space, so there's no judgment if it's not your first straight spirit of the day. But for many of us, it may be. So I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things just when we go in. Now, you're all on this call with me, but the first thing is, let's go into this with an open mind. Because as Luke mentioned at the beginning, we've gone through quite, not just from the 1500s, but in the past couple of 100 years, we've gone through quite an evolution with tequila. And a lot of us harbor potentially bad memories from not very well made tequilas. And it sits right at the front of your head. So when we're giving it a little swirl, allow it to settle, because that is going to wake up some of the spirit, but it's also going to release a lot of ethanol, which is going to hit you right at the middle of the head. So if you allow it to settle before we go in and have a little nose, and as Luke said, please pop any tasting notes, any notes into the comments for us. This is our Blanco tequila. So this is our unaged. We do rest it for approximately 6 weeks just to help mellow out some of the harsher notes that are on it. But please feel free to sip at your leisure, and we'll go into the tasting notes when we move down the range and how we find the Blanco as well. Now, what you're drinking right now is a tequila that was actually created in 2013. So when you think about 2013 and where this absolute evolution from the Aztecs drinking poke, you know, they used to call the agave plant the goddess of fertility. They believed it gave you everything that you needed. It gave them the sugar for energy. It gave them the fibers to be able to create tools. And this is where we jump forward a little bit, because when the Spanish actually entered into Mexico, they had a bit more distillation understanding. And they identified that this poke, this liquid that was giving people kind of the heat in their cheeks and making them a little bit merrier at these celebrations, was actually alcohol. So this is where we started to see really the first higher alcohol of, it's a mezcal. So it's the first variations of vino de mezcal. It was actually a mispronunciation of a Mexican word, which I am absolutely not gonna butcher just now. And it was vino de mezcal is what this became. Now, very similar to the UK, when the gin boom happened, if you had any type of tub, you were making some type of gin. In Mexico, if you had an agave plant growing within your vicinity, and you had an agave plant growing within your vicinity, this is when you had over 500 different species of agave, you were going to be producing a type of vino de mezcal. Nowadays, we have different categories of mezcal. We're actually going to be trying an artisanal mezcal today, but then you also have an ancestral one. And we'll delve a little more into that when we come to tasting on mezcal as well.
Brilliant. We've
Yeah.
already got some taste. Sorry to
We do, absolutely.
Got some great tasting notes in there. Paul has actually said, it's not showing up in the chat because it went direct to me, but it says good. Oh, sorry. I've lost the thing in front of me. I'm getting cream soda and iron brew as tasting notes. I think are excellent tasting notes. And Whiskey Slayer said pineapple upside down cake. So that's really good. Martin says complete newbie to tequila mezcal. Was not expecting how nice sweet this is. Vanilla marshmallows for me. So great tasting notes to start from everyone.
Yeah, and Siobhan, the cream and soda, you know, being a Scottish person, having iron brew, I also love getting those tasting notes in there where you kind of start pulling out where it's coming from, and almost like a little bit of tang if you ever destroyed your teeth on the iron brew bars that you used to have.
Iron brew bars. This is news to me.
Yeah, but with
like,
that cream soda.
Well, what were iron brew bars like? What kind of sweet were they?
They were what we call teeth rippers.
Right, I think I know.
Very long, chewy bars that had like little citric acid gems in there as well. So maybe we'll see if we can get a little pairing of maybe some old school old school candy shops next time as well when we keep
That would be a
helping.
fantastic idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So where are we in tequila? You know, we're at the point where we are drinking vino de mezcal. Also, let's not discount that there is many other variations of agave spirits and Mexican spirits that are being drunk, but vino de mezcal is a very authentic and will be most widely drunk at this stage. Now, we are going to do kind of a very quick fast forward because there's a lot happened to kind of fast production within tequila. It's always been created in a very authentic way using tools that were harvested from the land and the farmers that were protecting. Now, in the 1950s, I told you we were going to jump. We jumped straight from the 50s all the way up to the 1950s. All tequila had to be sweetened 100% by agave. Fantastic, right? That's what we want. But as human nature happens, unfortunately, we become a little bit greedy. And by the 1960s, you could actually add 30%. And at the time, there was no different stipulations between different tequilas. This was tequila as a whole. So you could add up to 30% in your same bottle of pretty much anything you wanted to change the flavor within your tequila. And then by the late 60s, you could add up to 50%. Now, this is where lots of producers that were creating incredible tequilas weren't very happy about being put in the same category as lots of kind of fast buck production that was happening. And we started to see a change and a shift in mentality. And this is when we actually had tequila split into three. Now you have tequila, you have 100% Blue Weber agave tequila, and you have something, well, we don't use the term mixto so much anymore because it falls under tequila, because that's where you actually add in a different flavor. But please don't think that all flavored tequilas are absolutely terrible, because a lot of them nowadays are made from a base of 100% Blue Weber agave if they want to have a honey or a coffee put on top of that. It's a very specialized way that they create the flavors now. But at the time in the 70s, this is where a lot of damage got done to tequila's reputation around about then, because this is when there was still blurred lines between what's tequila and what's 100% agave. You know, where we were having lots of different sugars added in. And I'm touching my head when I say this, because this is a lot of, if we do go back to, you know, the student evenings, unfortunately, of, God, I think I go back to 75p for a shot. Could you imagine that now? Especially not in London. But, you know, that feeling and that burn and people's bad memories that they have really did last generations. So where we start to see this kind of change in mentality really kind of pushing tequila forward now is a lot through cocktails. And it started to help that there's much more awareness over 100% agave, and we're just more aware of production and how we want to drink and how we want to enjoy alcohol now. But it's taken time, and we're still taking that time with tequila as well, because there has been this kind of very quick fast track and growth that we're seeing, because, you know, you can have aged spirits if you enjoy aged spirits. And maybe talking of aged spirits, if you have your next tequila ready, because I can end up rambling and forget to start going through with our tequilas.
Well, we actually on that point, we'll just come back to a couple before we move on from the Blanco, and we don't have to move on straight away, but there's some great taste notes. Actually, I'm hoping they're tasting notes. They could just be people listing their favorite sweet because we've got Tunnock's tea cakes from Grain, which is an excellent one. Chris Chalk says chocolate jumped out at me. Second sip caramel chalky bar jumped out for me, says Whiskey Slayer. This is real. I think this is this normally the reaction? I've never seen a tequila tasting where, when I think these are all spot on tasting notes. There's something about that kind of as you say, those really chewy sweets, or those kind of old school caramels. That really is in this. It's kind of got a sweetness, but also a bit of a acidity and sourness to it in there as well. Is that a common occurrence, Cara, for this one?
So for general blancos, no, it's not. And this is where, when we talk about very authentic production, and we're not actually going to be trying the Don Julio Blanco side by side with the Casamigos, but if we were, we would have a lot more kind of herbaceous notes and a lot more citrus coming through with Don Julio, who's been, producing since 1942. I mentioned Casamigos started producing tequila in 2013. So it's really been created for a modern palate. It's been created to be lighter, to potentially allow people to get past what would be perceived as the harsher notes within tequila as well. And excuse me, I can never get away from onions at this stage, because when you caramelize onions, you don't stick brown sugar on and whack it on a high heat. You do it very low and very slow. And that converts all of those bitter, tart, eye-watering profiles into a very kind of rich, jammy, sweeter, if you can hold out long enough. that texture that happens. And when we cook the agaves, when we cook those fibers, that's what we're doing. We're actually caramelizing. We're changing the fibers and the starches into sugar. So the longer we can hold out, the more honeyed that it's going to be, and the much more of these sweeter, these kind of creamier flavor profiles that will start to come out towards the end. Now, the absolute fastest that you can cook down your agaves is 4 hours. That's very fast. So it's using something called a diffuser, which is a big steel tank, and it's very aggressive, high heat steam. But you also have to strip away from the fibers as well, so it becomes like an agave gloop. With Casamigos, we still use a very traditional brick oven, but we actually cook it for 72 hours. Now, Don Julio, we cook our agaves for 48, which is even deemed a long time. But back in 2013, when my pal George, I know he couldn't be here today, but so it was George Clooney, Rande, Gerber, and a gentleman called Mike Meldman. He's slightly more of a silent, non-silent partner. Casamigos means house of friends. And actually, Mike Meldman was Rande and George's. I talk about them like they're my friends. We just hang out in Mexico occasionally.
Your colleagues,
We're colleagues, me and George. But when they bought houses down in Mexico together, it was Mike Meldman that brought them together. And they used to drink copious amounts of tequila. And that's when they decided that they were going to produce their own. So they didn't endorse a tequila. They created their own tequila. This was a side passion project just because they loved their homes down there. They wanted to be producing and to be part of it. But they were creating it for a modern palate when we think about 2013. It's only been around just over 10 years. So these slightly lighter notes that come through are a lot to do with the production and who we're hoping we can kind of bring into the fold of agave drinkers as well. So it's really great to see some of these tasting notes, which I'm loving the tonics tea cake as well.
Certainly. I've actually seen
a marshmallow, isn't it? I think it was mentioned before.
Yes, yeah, that was mentioned before. Yeah, I think by Whisky Slayer, if I scroll back up. Yeah, that was an excellent. Sorry, it was Martin. Sorry, yes, a vanilla marshmallow.
Yeah, Martin.
That one is really spot on, especially on the finish. Like, yeah, but they're all bang on the cream soda as well. No, excellent taste notes. So we maybe come on to the reposado. Just while we're pouring that, I have another question for you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
But obviously the process you were mentioning about the cooking it. So I know you kind of touched on this earlier, but I just tequila is kind of new to a lot of us here. How does that so it goes from it's cut down and it's cooked, and is what comes out of the cook, is that then fermented and then it's distilled? Is it like a 4-part process?
It is indeed, but we are missing out a hugely crucial point before this. You know, when we're talking about tequila, we're speaking about a product that's created from an organic plant, which actually takes, historically, you may have heard it takes up to 15 years to grow. Nowadays, it's roughly between 5 to 7 years. Now, a lot has changed within that. The climate is getting warmer. The rainy seasons are wetter. The hot seasons are hotter. So growth and also our technology to be able to understand when to water the plants at the right time, you know, when they're actually going to absorb that so that we're not wasting water when they're in their dormant stage within the day. Lots of these different processes, we need to move with the times, because once they get to full maturity, unfortunately, we can't use them. So we have to stop it right before. So yes, so at the harvest between 5 years, we then, well, I say we, the humidors, you know, the humidors are the farmers that work these fields, and they protect the agaves for the years before harvest as well. There's no school to learn to be a humidor. This is something that's handed down through generations. You know, it really is a lot of history that echoes in the fields, which is what I find kind of so magical about tequila and mezcals. But once we've harvested, we cut off these, you can probably see behind me, these very kind of large spikes, these leaves, because they actually have the bitter part. And we take the heart, the piña. I do this. I mean more this, this sizing. But we take the heart, and the reason it's called a piña is because it looks like a little pineapple. This was where it got named from. So we take the heart of the agave plant, we split it open and we cook it. Once all of this incredible agave juice comes off, we then add it into fermentation. Now, as many whiskey lovers will know, you know, this is where the juices really get going. This is where we start introducing alcohol, and the yeast strain that we introduce has such an impact on that flavor profile that we create as well. So we actually, with Casamigos, we do again, when we go back to, this tequila was made as a passion project, because I don't think we would have taken this, honestly, the amount of time on the cooking and fermentation if we knew we were going to be selling it globally. Because 72 hours cooking, and then we actually ferment for 80 hours. It's a really long stage to allow the flavors to start to combine and really come to life. And then we go into the distillation process. And for tequila, you have to distill your spirit twice. So we don't do any more than 2 distillations for both Casamigos and Don Julio, because, you know, we've gone through this process to maintain an incredible roasted agave note, and we don't want to strip that away through distillation. We want to keep a lot of the heart, a lot of the center part. We take it off at a slightly lower ABV than a lot of whiskeys or vodkas do. We take it off around the 55 to 60% alcohol, and then we cut it with water for the aging. So what we actually have, and what you're enjoying, and I think we've already got some tasting notes coming through, which is lovely. We age our reposado in ex-bourbon barrels. Now, to be a reposado means rested in wood. And I choose my words very carefully on that, because it doesn't specify what wood, it doesn't tell you what size, it doesn't tell you if it needs to be a barrel. So when we talk about premium tequilas and 100%, a lot of 100% agaves, they will be aged in ex-bourbon barrels. But technically, you could age your reposado in a 20,000 litre vat that's lined with wood. But then what you would need to do is you would need to actually almost put like a tea bag of wood chips in, and you would be forcing flavor into the liquid instead of extracting it from the wood. Now, we're based in Jalisco, in the northern part, so it has very hot days and cooler nights, which is incredible for the plants, but also incredible for aging. Now, shot caller, the Scottish person, is going to speak about whiskey for a moment. But when we age in Scotland, we lose 1 to 2% per year of our barrel through what we call angel share. So just little evaporations that happen through the cracks in wood and the expansion of the wood. So we talk about years. But those warehouses, if you have the privilege to ever go, regardless of how nice a day it is in Scotland, they are cold and damp. In Mexico, we actually lose up to 10% of our barrel per year. That is a huge amount. And it's because the alcohol is constantly expanding and contracting and interacting with that wood and passing through the little charcoal that's still there. So taking away any of the impurities that are left behind. So we talk about months rather than years in aging with tequila. So what we actually have is a 7-month aged reposado. Reposado must be aged from 2 months to a year, but we think the sweet spot for us, and actually, I think it's, where did we get? We've got a little kind of like woody pine coming through from Paul. Yeah, there's the toasted coconuts, absolutely, yeah. Alan and Yvonne. We start to get those flavors that we would expect to be interacting with wood with a little tropical note on top. The coconut always comes through for me. And this kind of builds from that cream soda as well.
No, definitely, yeah. No, as you're right, the comments, the tasting notes do suggest it's an evolution of it. So obviously, yeah, mention more pine and toasted coconut, I think is a great tasting note in that regard as well. I suppose you could have said a bounty bar for that, like, you know, if we really wanted to keep the theme going, but
to keep carrying on.
to keep it in the candy shop, as the Americans would say. And reposado literally means rested, doesn't it? That's like the direct translation.
Yeah, absolutely rested.
Now,
so far,
sorry, Dave. So, but my very rudimentary understanding of this spirit, because you mentioned obviously what you were saying earlier about there's kind of an explosion in the 50s. I suppose my two questions around that are: A, what kind of causes that explosion? Is there reasons in the market? And B, because obviously my understanding is there's not a lot of it's not a very woody place, Mexico. So it's why they traditionally didn't barrel age stuff, because they simply didn't transport stuff in barrels like we did in Northern Europe. So what inspires this tradition of resting it in wood? Is it an external influence from the markets it was exporting into? I suppose those are my two questions.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different sides that we come in from this as well. One dates back to Spanish would have always aged their spirits within wooden casks. A lot of their wines, a lot of sherries, that influence that came in. But also we have to be aware of where Mexico is in relation to the US. So when there was kind of influx of people going down into Mexico and drinking potentially what they found slightly harsher spirits that hadn't been treated or aged, you know, when you have anywhere, when you have kind of the untreated blank in Iraqs, they can be very punchy and very potent. You know, I'm sure, poutine, the first time people try very authentic historical spirits, it can be a bit of a shock to the system. And this was really where you saw the boom in the growth of Americans, slightly tequila, but using it in the wrong ways. Really wanted just to kind of mask flavor and get a bit drunk on a lot of these spirits. You know, there's no other way of sugarcoating that. It was originally, they were taking an incredibly authentic ancestral spirit and they were kind of abusing it to have a very quick, good time, because tequila makes you happy, and it in its purest form is meant to kind of keep a little bit of the hangovers away from what it is. But a lot of this is in production. So then we look forward, and the aging and the pushing forward. There was lots of different houses and influences that were pushing the boundaries at the time. So when you look at the 50s, Don Julio had been producing tequila for 8 years by that point. But he wasn't producing Don Julio tequila. He was producing just a very local tequila at that time and started barreling and playing around with different flavor profiles that were coming in there. And this is also how they were transporting their tequila. So before we had stipulations on what a reposado has to be, what an añejo has to be, they were taking their blanco tequila, they were putting it into barrels, and they were putting it on the back of a cart, and they were delivering it. So depending on how long that took, they would change, and it took different producers and blenders that understanding to be like, if I'm receiving this now after a month of resting and this is what's happened, curiosity is always what will push boundaries and change the trajectory of how spirits are created, which is why spirits are such an ever evolving and exciting space to be. For me, that's my little love story.
We'll all agree on that point on this call. But yeah.
Yeah, so that's where kind of aging started. It was through delivering and through kind of then that mass production that came in.
And in terms of its spike in popularity, why production was why there was such demand for the production in that period?
Back in the 50s, this was opening borders. So just crossing through in between, because it wasn't really as a global phenomenon when we look at where tequila is going. And I think last year someone floated to me that tequila was going to be bigger than whiskey in 10 years' time. We do not think it will get to that scale. But the boom that has happened within the past 4 years, last year, Casamigos was actually the largest growing spirit globally, not tequila, spirit. And this is kind of shows a change in people's mentality into agave spirits again, and the kind of the rise of an understanding of, if you wanted to have a little bit spicier, you know, we're going to move on to the añejo soon. If you want to have a little bit of that cinnamon spice and kind of a wee bit more of the tannins, I'm touching my cheek as we're doing this, we can go down that route of añejos. But if you want to have something brighter and mix and still kind of pack a punch as well, the blancos are kind of where we're still sitting in as well. So it's an exciting time, but really now it's the cocktail movement that is helping to drive tequila's visibility, kind of moving forward as well.
Yeah, well, margarita is one of the finest cocktails in the world, and obviously testament. My partner had a birthday recently. I wouldn't say which one. She'll kill me because this is being recorded. But the we did a margarita and margarita. That was the theme of the party. So we had margarita pizzas, but it was like a dress your own pizza, you know. So everyone would be bowl of toppings, and then margarita cocktails. But yeah, because obviously the Daisy used to be, I think it was a brandy cocktail from the late 19th century, and it was one of the most popular cocktails in the world at the time. It would have been as recognizable now as the old-fashioned margarita toss, although no one knows what it is anymore. It's totally died out. And margarita is literally, as you know, Spanish for daisy. That's the direct translation. So it's just a daisy cocktail done with tequila that we reckon became popular in Prohibition, and now is like the biggest cocktail literally on the world. I think last year it was the most drank cocktail worldwide. So there you go. That will drive tequila on.
Yeah, I mean, last year there's always quite a fun fact, actually, if anybody can tell me. Not talking about the suburbs, because I know Mexico City is about 22 million if we count all the suburbs. Does anybody know what the population of central Mexico City is, by any chance?
Well, I watched the Denzel Washington film Man on Fire recently, so I know the answer to this. So I'll let someone else in the chat.
It's where I get all my facts from Denzel. So it's actually
that film's about 20 years old now, so it's probably double.
So it's roughly 9 million people. And actually, the reason that we make this kind of connection between is that last year was 9 million people Googled how to make a margarita in the UK, or it was Googled 9 million times, which is one of those kind of huge stats that's just quite eye-opening as we're moving forward.
Even if it was Googled 9 million times, was it it was 1 million people, but they were drinking margaritas and they were like
the whole time.
How did I make that again? Let's look it up again. Just
If you would like to try kind of a twist on a margarita as well, there's a drink that actually predates the margarita, which was called a toreador. And it's very dry with a little touch of fruit in there. So it's just done with tequila, an apricot liqueur, and a citrus blend. Now, I say a citrus blend because lemons and limes in hot climates are quite interchangeable and kind of very sweet and sharp all at the same time. So it's a wonderful twist if you want to incorporate a little bit of that stone fruit in there as well. A toreador. So if we see that on, definitely jump onto that one.
What the Toreador? How do you spell that? I'm going to note that down.
Toreador.
Toreador. So as it's phonetically, I suppose. But that's brilliant. I'll check that out. I did an event once with Julio Bergamo. He invented the Tommy's Margarita. It was quite the evening. It was really great. Definitely a guy to, if you ever see him at a whiskey or a drinks festival or something, want to seek out. Fascinating man. There's some great comments from there. Graham says, loving my reintroduction to tequila up to now. So obviously something has happened and he stopped loving it. But Paul says, both really impressive so far. He's talked about the tequilas, not us, Cara, just to clarify. So Whiskey Slayer says, very smooth, spice, peppery, but not in your face. Oak dried fruit, but mellow again. Toasted coconuts with wood notes, said Alan and Yvonne. I think you touched on that one earlier. That is a great tasting note. Fantastic. So we come on to the añejo now, will we, properly? Or
yeah, we're going to come into the añejo. So this is where we can really see the DNA. You know, that a blanco tequila is the DNA of all aged tequila. So you can see the thread that pulls the whole way through. For me, I get so many of the tasting notes that you were pulling up on the reposado and the cacao that comes through. And when we come in with the añejo, which we double up the time. So we actually age this we go for 14 to 15 months for our añejo. And when as a tequila producer, you commit to making an añejo, you do have to age it in bourbon barrels. Well, you have to age it in barrels. So this is where there will always be that interaction with the wood. But you get a little bit more of that kind of Christmas spice. The cinnamon bark really comes through.
It's slightly more sour or something. I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way. It's just got a different.
No, not at all. You know, we almost come back to that little black pepper spice that comes across the top of your tongue. And the tannins that start to kind of just pull a little bit more forward before that heat comes down into your chest. And if we want to stick on in the sweet shop, I always get a slight kind of like herby cola cube that comes through here as well.
Bang on. Yeah. That is really hit the nail on the head. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So this is
just I've been neglecting my duties, Cara. Sorry, and I'm over talking over you as well, which I shouldn't be. But everyone in the chat, the Blanco, £48 with the discount we're giving out at the end, it'll be £40.80 on our website. I'll just bring up the other two now while I think of them. I'll bring up the Reposado if you want to keep going with the next part of this excellent tasting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to take a little segue because we've been talking about Casamigos and how the times that we take to produce and how we're doing it. But we wouldn't have these incredible modern tequilas and people enjoying unless we had the heritage and we had numerous different names kind of doing a lot of the legwork and a lot of the understanding of the agriculture and the farming and the distillation process and the perfecting of the skills. And one of those men was Julio Gonzalez. This was before he was a Don. You know, when it's not something that you're born into, you're not born into being a Don. It's something that's bestowed upon you. And he was actually born in 1925. So, you know, when we talk about it being a very different time in Mexico, he really, really grew up in those fields. He was around the humidors. He was continuously delivering other people's tequila. But when he was a very young man, around about 15 years old, he became the head of his family. His father, unfortunately, passed away very suddenly. But for me, this kind of says everything about his personality as a young man, because at 17, he knew he wasn't going to be able to provide for his family the way he wanted, delivering other people's tequila. So he actually believed enough in his knowledge and his understanding of the land and the plants. And I'm going to say, quote unquote, got a loan from a businessman in Mexico, where he actually then opened Primavera. And Primavera is in Jalisco, where we still have our brand home today, which is very proudly still there. So we actually planted our first agaves in 1942. So you can maybe see a little bit of the connection of why 1942, our luxury kind of super premium tequila, is named after, as a little hat tilt to the year that we first planted our agaves. But he didn't start producing Don Julio then. I know I mentioned a little bit earlier. It wasn't until 45 years later that he actually allowed us to put his name on a bottle. Now, I say we, unfortunately, it was not me who asked him to put his name on his bottle. It was actually his kids. And at Primavera, they like to have a party. Everything is about community. It's about the farmers' families and people coming together. And when they asked to put his name on a bottle, he said under two stipulations. Now, the first one being, I know you've got miniatures, but the first one was that it would have to go in a half-size tequila bottle.
Cara, just so we're on the same page, we're on the Don Julio 70 now, not the Casamigos Anejo, or?
So we've just had a little sip of the Casamigos Añejo, and we're going to move on to the Don Julio Blanco.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, no, just making sure we're on the same page. Sorry.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the Cristalino. Sorry, I said Blanco there. But for Don Julio, he wanted to go in a half-size bottle. And this was so when it was put in the middle of a table, everyone could maintain eye contact. And the second thing was that we would actually use his spare of the at the time he was just making blancos. So this is where our reposado was born and where the half-size bottle of tequila was actually born. And we released this in 1997. You know, that's a huge difference between 1945 to 87. There was a lot of time spent on be planted so that sunlight hit them the whole way around. You know, Don Julio up into his 80s used to actually pick single strains of grass in the field so that his agave plants, that honestly he thought as an extension of his family, weren't having to fight for any of the nutrients. But as we sing tequila, we have a Blanco, a Reposado, and an Añejo. But we wanted to kind of really stay true to the innovation and the techniques that he was producing and that he helped to push forward. So when it got to our 70th anniversary, we got very original with the naming on this, calling it Don Julio 70, I know. But on the 70th anniversary, we actually produced the world's first Cristalino tequila. And that's what we're going to be trying. Now, Cristalino is as a whole, it's a very new classification within the tequila realm. What we have done with our Cristalino, even though it is a crystal clear white, we've actually taken our Añejo tequila that we age for 14 months and we pass it through activated charcoal. Now, charcoal will actually strip away the color component that the wood had actually imparted. And what happens is something quite magical for me. It still has the complexity of an aged tequila. You know, when we come on the nose, you can still find those vanillas and a little bit of maybe slightly more of the subtle kind of white chocolate than the darker cacao that you would normally find within añejos. but I'm going to do a little chicken and the egg here. Because for me, a little bit of green goes back into it. So you actually get maybe a touch of like green apple, which has no place living in an aged spirit, but it's there and it's through kind of pulling out with the charcoal in there. Now, this is actually going to be the lowest ABV that you're going to try today. With our 70, we actually dropped it down. The rest of our range within Don Julio sits at 38% alcohol, but we dropped the 70 down to 35. We wanted to open up some of those slightly hidden underneath. The same way when you add water to your cask strength whiskies and those flavor notes open up and you can kind of get under the alcohol. This is also what we wanted to do with our Añejo Cristalino.
It's really interesting. The color difference, as you say, I know you've obviously explained the process, but considering they're both classes Añejos, is quite striking when you see them both out of the bottle. The excuse me, compared to the Casamigos, we've already got whiskey sources butterscotch and vanilla straight away, and yeah, definitely the bottle is a really clever idea. I think the idea that you can make eye contact and everything, I think that's good. Also means you can buy shorter bookshelves, which is my big issue around here with the whiskeys. I'm sure every whiskey collector knows that bookshelves are they're never far apart enough. Just on the while people are getting tasting notes in, if they want, so the Reposado is 55, it's 46.75 with the discount at the end of the night. The Añejo Casamigos is 59 down to 15, and then this one is 89 for the Don Julio on our site. That's obviously before discount. I'll tell you now what it is with the discount. With the 15% off for people who purchase pack, it goes down to 75.65. In terms of the being an anniversary release, how limited is this, or is this going to run as a continuous thing? Or
yeah, the Cristalino is part of our continuous release now as well. So we have a couple of new releases that have come out within the Don Julio range. The Rosado will actually be one that is released towards the end of this year. And this is where we've actually finished in different cask finishes. Now, it's very different from how when we were used to be able to do cask finishes. We finish it in a ruby port cask, but we use it in a dried wood. So we disassemble and then we reassemble the wood when it gets to Mexico. Because when you actually use wet casks, there's around about 5 to 6 actually will be held within those casks. So when you have different sherry finishes and port finishes from about 20 years ago, the barrel will have released a lot of that liquid back into the whiskeys or the bourbons that you're finishing. With tequila, we want to add in a few more of those tannins that you find from the port. We don't want to sweeten it and pull out any of the sugars. We want that residue to add a different layer of depth. So we actually unpin and reassemble similarly when they get out. So the Rosado will be coming in December, which is a very exciting release for us. And then we also have the Extra Añejo. So when we spoke about losing 10% of the barrel, Añejo tequilas, and what you're tasting now is an Añejo tequila that's been charcoal filtered, can be aged anything from 1 year up to 3 years. We actually only go to 14 months for both of our Añejos because of the flavor profile. We actually want to keep some of that spice, and we want to keep it very smooth and not pull too many of the tannins out. But when we get to 3 years and we get to Extra Añejo, that's where you can really start to pull out some of the wood and brings a different kind of layer of complexity. So the Ultima and the Rosado will be the next ones from Don Julio that you'll be able to see as well.
And that's what they call it if you're over 3 years, is extra añejo. It's not añejo, more añejo. Sorry, that's not
An
añejo
añejo.
more. No. I'll
This
workshop
is where
that
we
when I come back. That was um, Graham is this smooth, sweet, yet citrus back notes come through. The Paul's sour apples, I definitely agree. There's a grassy sour apple note on the finish. It's like some kind of, maybe PX single malts can have that as well, that kind of grassiness at the end. Graham says, yeah, smooth, sweet, smooth yet citrus at the back of it, rather than ready. Martin says, interesting to taste the progression from Blanco to Añejo. Definitely notice the influence of time. Get a lot more caramel in the Añejo. Cristiano becomes a lot more subtle for me, bringing a lot of citrus / herbal notes back into it. All really nice. Marvelous. And Whiskey Slayer says, lemon and pepper finishing notes for me, but all up to now have been smooth and full on. I found that the Casamigos was the most peppery, but yeah, I totally agree with this one as well. They have kind of progressed in that kind of spiciness, definitely.
Yeah. So I have purposely done a little sideway Casamigos to go into Don Julio. We're actually going to come back to the Casamigos mezcal now as well. Now, the reason for this is that occasionally when we come in with mezcal, it's very, speaking kind of with people that enjoy lots of whiskeys as well, a lot of comparison happens between mezcals and Islay whiskeys. You know, the smoke level can differ, but a lot of the time to try and pick up some of the more subtle flavors that you can get from the Cristalino after you've had a little bit of a smoky hit on your palate, a little bit more difficult. So we're actually going to come in for the mezcal, which is actually done in the charcoal kind of frosted bottle. Making sure that it's there. We use a very similar technique, but we come down out of the highlands. Now, we actually produce our mezcal from Espadin. Mezcal can be produced from about 50 different agaves now. There's a lot more research and a lot more stipulation that goes into this as well. And there will be more regulations that come for mezcal as time goes on with it. But the few that we absolutely must stick to are that we stick within our range of agave plants that we can use so that we actually protect a lot of the wild species that are around. So out of the 280 wild species, we can use 50. And the smokiness that we actually get, there's a little bit of a misconception that all mezcal must be smoky, but it's actually just a byproduct of how it's produced. So we grow, our Espadin agaves down in Oaxaca. So it's further down in Mexico. So the soil is slightly harder. So the roots have to work slightly harder to get down and into that soil to get the nutrients. So generally with mezcals, you'll find a little bit more of those herbaceous, those peppery. Once we get under the smoke, the eucalyptus and citrus notes that will come through. And that's through the agave plant working a little bit harder just to get that water and to get the nutrients. But what we do once we actually harvest, we'll cut them open and we'll actually put them underground to smoke. And this is where you can decide what your smoke level is. You know, do you want an ashy smoke? Do you want it to be a kind of petroleum smack in the face, which some people absolutely adore, but the differing levels that we do. So similarly to how we did the tequila, where we cooked the agaves for 72 hours, we actually smoke them for an extended period of time so that it becomes under compressed ash. So you'll have a very smoky upfront, but it will mellow out to allow maybe not so much of the lime notes, but maybe a bit more kind of like grapefruit zest that will come through underneath. And then we do our fermentation where, again, we do the same elongated period for the 80 hours on there as well. Mm.
And the distillation for mezcals is done not in metal stills, is it?
Yeah, so we still distill twice, and because of the artisanal process, we will do a blend. We'll do a blend of metal stills. If you are ancestral, you won't touch any stainless steel stills. So within that, that's where you would actually do the distillation off of the clay pots and the trickle down method. And all of that is done on nose and still done very much by taste. Whereas a lot of production now, when you're looking, and you go into distilleries and it's very much computers, and the timing has happened now perfectly. And this is when our heads have left, and then we switch, and this is our heart, and then more time and the computer switches it to the tails. Within mezcal, it is still all very much done by taste and by eye. So we will do a blend within our mezcal because we're not ancestral, we are artisanal. So we will still use a lot of the clay, but it will have gone through at least one stainless steel pot distillation still.
Fabulous. Well, Paula says this is going to sound disgusting, but I have an Italian fragrance that is based on horse sweat and stables. If anyone, you'll recognize it here. It's like smoky bacon and straw with a sweet grassy blend. Delicious though. I feel like you've been a bit harsh on horse sweat and stables there, Paul. Like, I've smelled it worse. I've never been near a horse, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, but it does have that kind of like funky manure, and I think people will want to stay away from what can have negative connotations and tasting notes, but actually that funkiness is really where that's kind of coming from, because it is around the soil and where we're smoking it in the ash.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Whiskey Sarah says, Cara, 100% agree. Ash smoke, earthy charcoal, bacon rind. Yeah, the bacon rind, definitely. It has got, yeah, the meatiness there, as Paul says, yeah, spot on. No, it's really interesting. Maybe it's because of I do like smoky whiskies as well. Cara's, you kind of get the Islay comparison. I do have a graw for mezcals. I think it's also the story, the idea that they are that bit more artisanal than the or a lot more in a lot of cases than the big tequila producers. There's a romance to it, but then I suppose we were talking actually before the call. I think you touched on it as well earlier on about the kind of sustainability of the irrigation and over harvesting of agave, and the issues with the environment, even for the impact that it's had even for tequila production, particularly with the popularity in recent years. But I think that's even more potentially corrosive or pervasive in mezcal because of the regions and the traditional methods and stuff that well, now that we have a grow in the West for these things and are willing to pay huge money, it can have an impact on these smaller communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge, without quoting superhero films, there's a huge responsibility when you are supporting the growth of a category within Diageo and Don Julio. We were actually the first tequila brand to have the ARA accreditation, which is a huge movement that is protecting deforestation. In Mexico, there is a huge amount of space, which is how we are able to plant more agaves and to kind of accelerate our agave growth. But we also, just because of this space, we have to be very mindful of the indigenous species that are living there. So we work to make sure that agaves grow kind of like pumpkins, like slightly out of the ground, the roots are exposed, and the seeds and the fertilization and how they're actually reproducing together. So not over farming the same lands, that we're not actually stripping down any ancestral lands or agave species to be able to plant and to farm. And there is lots of companies that are really getting behind this initiative now to really show that they are protecting the Mexican heritage and the lands. But a lot of what we have to look at now is water, because as our world is ever evolving and getting ever warmer, I'm not sure if you heard about the fires that happened in Oaxaca recently, or within the past year, that we have to protect water. And it's down to not being wasteful when we're watering our agave plants. And a lot of that is merging new technology with the Himidor's understanding of the farms and of the plants. We actually managed to reduce our water consumption by 60% through understanding that the agave plants actually retain and take most water right as it comes out of the cold stage at night and into the daylight. That's when they wake up and they're actually going to absorb the most. Whereas before, we would have thought when it's really, really hot, we want to give them lots of water because they're getting dehydrated. Actually, that's when they really kind of go into their dormant stage, and the plants kind of do their thing.
It's like the opposite of me. When I wake up, that's when I discharge the most water. But
exactly, you're the opposite of an agave plant, where the agaves want it and you want to get rid of it.
Maybe that was too crass. Sorry, but couldn't.
Absolutely not. We're on the 5th tequila. Well, on the mezcal now.
Yes.
So it's about that time.
Is the mezcal coming out at the end of the tasting? It's like when, back home when we go on the beer and you end up back at the house. That's when the pachin comes out. Like, you never early in the night. It's about 2-3 in the morning. Like, we finished on the mezcal, which is the more artisanal. You were mentioning about the before we came on the call. I don't know if you want to touch on it. Speaking.
Sorry,
no panic. At this stage, we'll wait for Cara to come back, and whenever you're back, just ping the thing and I can unmute you. But this is, I suppose, last things around the last one, folks. We can give our preference of order in the chat if you want to give in which one your favorite was, and I'll give the discount code now as well, which is WS24CD. So Casa Don was the kind of the logic behind that one, if you want to remember it. So you're back? Marvelous. You should be able to take yourself off mute now.
Great.
Brilliant.
Apologies for that. My headphones were trying to connect from the other side of the room for a moment.
Yes, I know that when the battery starts dying in the Bluetooth and then it suddenly starts trying to connect. Yeah, worst
Absolutely.
in the world. Not at all, but I mean, yeah, but it's pretty annoying. So yeah, people. So Paul has just asked. I just gave the discount code while you're away, Cara. So the discount code for that is WS24 CD. The logic behind the CD being Casa Don. For the thing. So that'll get you 15% off all of the tequilas and the mezcal we tried tonight. I had mentioned the price of the Don Julio was 89. So this is 62 before discount. So I think for a mezcal of this this quality, I think this one out of all the 5 is probably my favorite in terms of value for money. Considering after the discount, it is 52.70. Do you have a favorite, Cara?
Do you know, I'm going to be honest, because I am a little bit of a Blanco baby. I love a little bit of the citrusy notes that come through. So I'm either the Blanco or the 70 for me.
Marvelous. The Blanco was exceptional. I think not because my expectations were low for the whiskies tonight, but maybe it's just if you do for the whiskies tonight, Jesus, that's for the tequilas tonight. But when you're doing like a whiskey tasting and then there's a whiter spirit in there, your brain is just trained when you drink a lot of whiskey to be like, that's going to be decent, and then we'll move on to the real stuff. But that really was phenomenal, and everyone's comments in terms of the sweet shop flavors were really good. Whiskey Slayer said that the mezcal is the favorite, and then basically going back in order. Then the Don Julio. Graham's gone for the mezcal, and then the blanco. Claire, but he says all sounds all great and opened up the taste buds to a future with tequila. So we've won a convert there, Cara. Claire and Ian says 4, 3, 2, 1. Mezcal very different and enjoyable. Hard to decide an order. Siobhan, so 4 being the Don Julio to think. Siobhan says has to be the Blanco or the Añejo for me. The Cristaliano really surprised me. Martin says hard to rank 2, 3, 1, 4. I think mezcal is one that I keep sipping and can't decide on. Shall need more. So
yeah, when I'm making drinks, regardless of what SKU I use, there's always 5 to 10 mils of mezcal that goes in there. You know, it helps just add a little depth and a little smoky nugget on top of kind of all my drinks.
Yeah, well, I mean, because Whiskey Slayer earlier said this will do well in my own blending decanter. So I'm actually not sure what that means. So if you could enlighten us, Whiskey Slayer, but it sounds good along the lines of what you're saying there, Cara. You were mentioned, I don't know if you want to touch on this, because we were talking about sustainability as well before the call, and you mentioned sort of recycling parts of the environment or whatever. Is that something you want to touch on or not? Or
sorry, recycling parts.
was it around waste management?
Oh, so the very unglamorous side.
You don't have to go into it if you don't want to.
No, working with sustainability. It's a lot of work has to, you know, when we talk about very rural parts where we have lots of farming and how we can actually support communities, and we work very closely, not just with the ARA for deforestizations, but we work with the governments on how best that we can support recycling water and supporting. Honestly, there's a lot of work that has to be done through sewage systems to help communities within there. And we do a lot of recycling of water and purifying and reworking through. So there has to be ownership on larger companies that are supporting and how we move this forward to make sure that this is a sustainable growth, because it's happened very quickly. So we need to make sure that we're protecting the people and the areas that are supporting our growth, that we're supporting their best interests as well. That's a big point with us moving forward, and a huge kind of focus within sustainable kind of 2030 and our predictions that we want to have tonight.
Marvelous. Brilliant. Well, Cara, unless there's anything else you want to touch on, or anyone's got any quick questions in the chat.
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, because so Paul has said great selection tonight, great work again, guys. Big thanks to Cara for all the info. It's really been massively informative. It's always a highlight for me when we deviate from whiskey for a bit. I mean, whiskey will always be my first love, but it's always good to expand. Put yourself out of your comfort zone and expand the knowledge, your knowledge. But this has gone above and beyond my expectations. Both your wonderful knowledge and the quality of the drinks. It's really good, especially. I don't want to say this earlier, but you kind of slightly touched on it when you were talking about George Clooney. These celebrity brands, it can often, in some cases, just mean you're paying a bit extra for something you'd get cheaper, but for the name association. But I must say the quality of this, it doesn't certainly come across like that at all. In my humble opinion. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Marvelous. We've just got a couple more comments there before we finish. So Whiskey Sir says, as for the decanter, I like to add certain flavors to my own mix every now and then. I find it amazing combo. It's always been a whiskey, but this will go in well. That's really interesting. Keep us updated. Siobhan says, I'm a big tequila fan, but I learned something tonight. Thank you. Claire and Ian said, thank you for all the interesting information. Alan Yvonne going with mezcal, then the Casamigos. So they said, thank you. Didn't know anything about tequila mezcal before tonight. Really interesting. Great night as always. Thank you, Martin. Paul has said, I can definitely taste the love and craft in these. So brilliant. Well, I think that's the love and craft is a good note to leave it on. Thank you again, Cara, for your time. And I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future. You never know.
Absolutely. More tequila always to be had.
Marvelous. Brilliant. Thanks, folks. Our next tasting will go on sale early next week. So keep an eye out for that. It's actually one we've done before, but with a different twist. So I think you'll if you might have you'll enjoy it. So keep an eye out for that in your email inbox. Thanks again, Cara, and have a lovely evening.
Bye bye. Thanks.